On the anniversary of D-Day, June 6th, 1944, many people will be refreshing their understanding and appreciation of that historic day when the Allies advanced against Fortress Europa on the beaches of Normandy, the largest amphibious assault in the history of mankind. The logistics of assembling so many men, material, and their equipage for one mighty thrust is a marvel of modern warfare, a veritable miracle. How many things could go wrong? Well, many things did go wrong. In addition to the casualties, which would be considered normal in the course of such a battle, many more died from the sheer difficulty of even engaging in such a battle from the sea. One of the logistical problems was keeping track of the men, who are given a serial number by the Army, which places them in a unit where they lose their individual identity. And so it happened that brothers Fritz Nyland, Bob Nyland, and Preston Nyland found themselves in Normandy on the same day. Irish boys from right here in Tonawanda. I mean, if you don't know, you can walk from here to the river and see a monument with their names on it. Their names and Skip Muck, another good Tonawanda Catholic boy who went to St. Francis of Assisi Elementary School right here and graduated a Tonawanda warrior. Babe Heffron said he thought of Muck every time he took communion. But I'm getting ahead of myself. They made movies about the whole bunch of them. The blockbuster was, of course, Saving Private Ryan, which is about the Nyland brothers, renamed to Ryan, and moved to Iowa and fictionalized. In the book Band of Brothers, it's Skip Muck who tells the story. A few days after D-Day, Fritz Nyland came down the line to say goodbye to his friends, especially his best friend, Skip Muck. Fritz had gone to see his brother Bob, but they told him there that Bob had died manning a machine gun. Fritz immediately took off to find his other brother, Preston, but he also had been killed on D-Day. By the time Fritz returned to his unit, Father Francis Sampson, the military chaplain, was looking for him to tell him that a third brother, Edward, had been killed in Burma that same week. Fritz was presumed the sole surviving son, and here the grandiloquence of an actor in Saving Private Ryan, playing the part of the Chief of Staff General George C. Marshall, who invokes no less than Abraham Lincoln, gives us those memorable words saying, "We are going to get him out of there." Mother Nyland had received all 3 telegraphs on the same day. What was it like for her when Fritz came home? Did she burst into tears? Did she make him a pie, do you think? Did they throw a party for him over there at St. Francis of Assisi? What kind of joy did she experience, having been informed of the deaths of 3 of her sons, that her last and only remaining son should be returned to her and to the whole community? Yet she weeps over her 3 dead sons, doesn't she? For a year she wept, sighing, remembering the day they left home to go to the war, remembering their little faces, the mischief they got themselves into, their infant cries, hungry, looking to her for comfort, but they were now gone and dead. What bliss, then, when they found the oldest of the brothers, Edward, in a POW camp in May of 1945. He who was dead to her has been returned to her alive. Her mourning has been turned to gladness, her weeping into joy. You know she put on her very best dress, pinned a hat onto her hair, slipped on her Sunday shoes, and ran down to the church to give thanks to God. Mother Nyland carried the grief of the loss of 2 sons, and she carried the joy of the return of 2 more. Here we have a widow whose only begotten son has died. He was a man, just like Nyland brothers were all men, but he was only one. He had no brothers, and he was gone, all gone, and he was dead. And she was an old widow and dried up, cut off from any hope, and she was weeping. When the Lord saw her, he was moved to compassion. His insides wrestled with him, and overcome with compassion, he reached out and touched the bier. Do not weep. There wasn't time to wonder whether this young man, Jesus of Nazareth, who rebuked unclean spirits and made them come out, who healed people of their diseases, who cast out fevers and other maladies, the maladies of Israel and the maladies of the outsiders, of anyone who asked him, there wasn't even time to wonder whether this young man, Jesus, would raise the dead. Could he raise the dead? Could he even raise the dead? With a word he speaks, young man, I say to you, arise. And the dead man sat up and began to speak. And Jesus gave him to his mother. Yes, he can raise the dead, and yes, he does raise the dead out of a deep compassion, where his insides turn themselves over like it does for us when we are moved for compassion. When the insides of the Son of God turn over on themselves, he desires to raise the dead. And we now know that the kingdom of God is here. It seems like a long time ago now, when our little Jack was in the newborn ICU there at Children's Hospital, and he was waiting for spinal cord surgery, there was, beside Jack, another little boy, a tiny baby, born far too prematurely, and his mother was weeping. This one would not grow up to be a man. What about all the mothers whose sons died and Jesus did not raise them from the dead? What about all the weeping of all the mothers in all the world whose children died and Jesus did not raise them from the dead? What about Eve, who weeps over her sin which brought death to all her children, even being called Eve, the mother of all the living? What about Mary, whose son Jesus was taken from the cross and laid upon her lap, and she wept? Skip Muck, Fritz Nyland's best friend, was killed at the Battle of the Bulge 6 months after D-Day. Fritz must have heard, and he searched out Skip's mom and dad here in Tonawanda, and together they mourned the loss of another son to the great war of good versus evil. It was Skip Muck who took communion, saying, well, if we're going to die, we're going to die in a state of grace. And he did die. His buddy Babe Heffron, who survived the war, said, I think of Skip Muck every time I take communion. God has come to see his people, to see how we're doing, to remind us that we are in a state of grace, being in the kingdom of God. Jesus died for us so that he might purchase us from death, and now that we belong to him, we live with him in his kingdom in everlasting blessedness, righteousness, and innocence. When that dead man started talking, Jesus gave him to his mother. See, he has raised you from the dead, and he gives you to your loved ones, and he gives them to you. And now everyone has seen it. This Jesus raises us from the dead. There is no denying that he is the Son of God. The Son of God is here in our midst, and fear seizes us. And why not? Why wouldn't fear seize us? We are dead men, dead women, sitting up and talking, and Christians are still the talk of the town. Or don't you know that as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. They will glorify God one way or another, and you are the object of that glory because you know what happened after Jesus died. Mary suddenly stopped weeping.